Hey, I'm Scottie and thanks for joining me. So I wanted to share with you 5 common mistakes that I see beginners make when sketching people in ink. And I've got some great tips to help you avoid getting stuck. Sketching people quickly and freely in ink is so rewarding, but it has its challenges. So hopefully this answers some of your questions when you're starting out. But I'd love to hear from you. Where do you actually get stuck when you're sketching people? So let me know in the comments so that I can focus more of my tutorials on those areas where you get stuck. So I'm sketching this reference here. This is a really interesting reference because it has lots of different details we can go into. And that actually leads us into our first mistake. And that is when you're first starting a sketch, getting stuck into the details. So a number of you have talked to me about how you might start with the hair and then you've gone down to do the eyebrows, then the eyes, then the nose, mouth, chin. But then when you go back to do the back of the head or put it in context, you just realize the whole face is too long. So to help you avoid getting lost when you're first starting out your sketch, I'd recommend going around the main shapes first and leave the details. So in this example here, I'm skipping the face. And the trick here is to outline the main shapes to build up a silhouette. So we want the silhouette to be working and the main shapes to be working and be in proportion so that we can then add in the details later like the face. The next common mistake is not learning the basic proportions of the body. So you can see here that I've got a little technique. I've showed this many times in tutorials before, but this actually is really helpful to have in your mind as a beginner to know some basic proportions so you can measure out your body as you're going and make sure that it's the correct length. As you get more advanced, you won't be needing to measure out as much these kind of proportions, but I think it's important when you're starting out to purposely measure them out. And it can be confusing because you see people sketch, like even some of my sketches, I'm sketching without measuring. And so then you think as a beginner that you need to sketch straight to ink without any sort of measuring or any kind of proportions. But I think it is important if you're struggling in that area, you're getting stuck in the area of proportions, that your bodies are looking too long or too short, that it's really important that you have a little technique that you can check and then you can adjust your sketch as you're going. And the more you do this, the better you'll get and you'll really improve your overall proportions. So you can see here I've measured out with dots and I've been putting on the screen the proportions that I use as I sketch. So you can take a screenshot of this. If you'd also like these templates, I've got them on my Patreon. And if you've tried to look up on YouTube or read a book about proportions of the body and the arms, I feel like it can be quite confusing. There's lots of slight variations and sometimes the way people measure it, it's very difficult when you're sketching straight to ink and not drawing a pencil mannequin underneath. How do you actually measure? So that's why I've come up with this idea or this technique of measuring my proportions. From the shoulders, we have 3 down to the crotch, 3 heads, 3 head lengths. That's why I start with the head every time. And then from the crotch to the above the ankles is another 3 heads. So we can evenly divide the whole body up. One of the biggest things that beginners struggle with is the length of the arm, where that elbow is. So if the arm starts at the shoulder and the wrist goes down to where the crotch is, that means the elbow is exactly halfway, which is 1.5 heads down from the shoulder, and then 1.5 heads from the elbow down to the wrist. I find that really easy to work out because if I've got between the shoulders and the crotch, I can just find halfway between that, and that's where the elbow goes. And by the way, the knee also comes down through 1.5 heads from the crotch down towards the ankles. So it all seems to be quite even and easy to work out, easy to remember. The third mistake is overworking the hands. You can see here that my line work is very, very simple. And so with the hands, we've got to keep it simple to match the rest of the sketch. If we go over the fingers so much, we go over them, make them stand out, it's very difficult, especially at a small scale when we're sketching quickly, to make those hands look good. So my technique, my recommendation for you if you're doing hands, is to keep them very simple and basic. So a hand can be divided into 2 shapes, the back of the hand shape or the palm, and then the fingers. So if we keep that in mind, that we just want to outline that main shape, those main 2 shapes, then we can have your hands, even if they look like gloves without fingers. I think that's really important. You can draw the two shapes, and then you can add 3 little dots there for where the gap between the fingers are, and then just hint at the fingers, just little lines, and they come after you've drawn the main shapes. If you do draw fingers, then I recommend you keep them very simple and light. You can see here that these fingers don't look that great, but when I finish a sketch, I hardly even notice them. So I recommend keeping your hands very simple, loose and light, but keeping in mind those main shapes with the gaps between the fingers being not emphasized too much. Mistake number 4 is all about making your line work too rigid. So this is a bit of a difficult mistake to address, because in some ways when you're starting out, you need to draw more slowly and you need to have control over what you're doing. So I'd prefer your sketch to look more rigid, but get those proportions and main shapes right first before you look into the line work. But if you're at that stage where that's where you're getting stuck, your sketches are looking all right in proportion, but you're getting stuck in the rigid line work, I've got some tips for you. So to gain control, I see a lot of beginners start by drawing lots of little tiny lines all connected to try and outline those shapes. Or the other thing I see is that the line work is very straight, so there's no variation, there's no wobble to the line, there's no character in the line. And some of these things are things you just develop over time as you gain confidence. So you have to keep practicing. But if you want to start your journey towards this, I'd recommend trying to draw each little segment of line in one line. So for example here when I'm drawing the shoulder down to the elbow, I'll try and get that whole line in one go, and then I'll stop, leave a little gap, and then I'll do the under part of the arm in one line, and as I'm going, I'm adding little wiggles here and there to give it character. So the final mistake is placing the features on the face in the wrong position. So I see this a lot, especially with the eyes. So this is what I'd recommend beginners do. Once you've got the general silhouette of the head right and you're happy with that, and then you've used the hair outline to get that face shape, then when we've got the face shape, we can move into the features. So going from big shapes down into the details. And so I've got the hairline at the top and I have the chin at the bottom. And then I place 4 dots on the face to divide the face into 3. And then I can put the eyebrows and the bottom of the nose. And now we can add in where the eye goes. It's about 2/3 up from the bottom of the nose towards the brow. And you can see it angles back a little bit in this reference. So I'm placing 2 dots and I'm checking, I'm looking back and forth. Is that eye in the right position? You can also check by going from the very top of the head to the chin and making sure that eye is about in the middle between those 2 points. And then with the eyes, we want to make them about the width of a nose. So not too wide and not too narrow. And the gap between the eyes should be a width of the nose so that they're not too far apart. So it all comes down to this point. When you put in the eyes, if they're good, then the rest of the sketch can be great. But if you get those eyes slightly wrong, it puts off the whole sketch because we often look at the eyes first and then make our way down the image. So then I've put in the mouth there, you can see, and I'm just focusing on the shadow, the dark part of the sketch. We're going to go straight to ink, and it's such a small face like this, it's much easier to focus on the shadows. So don't make the mistake of going in and outlining all the lips or adding too much detail to the eyes. It's just little hints, smaller little hints that you can add more to as you go, but always start out with a minimum amount of lines. If you're making any of these mistakes, try my tips as I really think they'll help you improve your sketches. But of course, the most important thing is to practice. Practice a lot in those areas. I've spent nights practicing, frustration, many sketchbooks, but it's definitely worth it in the end. If you need help with practicing and getting motivation to practice, you can consider joining my Patreon where I have all my tutorials in full length. There's also some exclusive tutorials there. I have high resolution references so you can sketch along with me. You can also, if you're in the sketching school tier, you can email me your sketches for a little bit of feedback. I'm just finishing off this sketch with a bit of a light wash, so keeping that very light layers, building up a few shadows, and then adding highlights with my white Posca pen, which is a fine tip pen. As I mentioned before, I'd love to hear from you. In what areas do you find you make mistakes? What areas are you frustrated with? How do you find sketching people? Do you struggle with anything? Let me know in the comments. It really helps me make better tutorials that are more focused for you. Well, thanks so much for watching. All the best with your sketching, and I'll see you in the next one.